everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Culture Dads, Age of Sword and Cassette. I'm your host, Big Dave Martell, and with me, I have Mr. Mike from the Imperium Press. We got a really cool topic today. I know we talk a lot about pop culture and retro pop culture, and this is kind of our shtick that we do over here, Culture Dads. We talk about the pop culture that we grew up with and how it is meaningful to us culturally. And then we do deep dives into it, talking about the philosophy behind it and kind of like a, what's that called? A retrospect on a lot of this stuff. But today we're going to talk about something that obviously we don't remember, but we're going to talk about something that is very, very interesting as well as important to a lot of people that are of folkish, dissident or nationalist lean, and that is Romanticism, the movement of Romanticism, the philosophy of Romanticism, and also we're going to get into kind of people's reactions and perspectives of it today. So what's going on, Mr. Mike? How you doing, sir?
I'm good, man. I've we were talking before. I just got over the coof. This is the newest, latest thing for me. I haven't had it yet until now, and this is. I've had the most recent PSYOP disease, and I'm excited for the next one.
You're excited for the next one. Yeah. You said this is your first time?
First time, baby.
Yeah. I just got over my fourth one. I kicked its ass 4 times. Yeah.
Yeah, man. You're an old hand at this by this point.
Yeah. I don't get COVID. COVID gets Dave.
Yeah. So
let's Romanticism. Mike, what is or was Romanticism?
So Romanticism is it is a very hard thing to explain, to be honest, because it's a wide-ranging movement. Basically, what it is a reaction against the Enlightenment. So I think it's good to actually just say a word about the Enlightenment before we really dive deeply into Romanticism. Sure. It's not really clear exactly where the Enlightenment begins. All of this stuff is quite messy and vague and fuzzy and all that, because these are epical movements over the course of centuries in the making that really actually upended and made for a massive sea change in like the traditional structure of life from the Middle Ages. But anyway, the Enlightenment, not exactly clear where it begins, probably sometime in the 17th century. But I actually favor the restricted thesis that the Enlightenment proper is something of the 18th century. So it's more or less a movement of rationalism that is... that follows on from the scientific revolution, basically, like the success of Roger Bacon's empirical method. This obviously had enormous. The scientific revolution had enormous consequences culturally as well as technically and scientifically. The success of Bacon's own researches, Galileo, Newton, Huygens, people like Kepler, people like this, inspired a whole worldview. It didn't just inspire more science. It inspired an ideology, a scientistic ideology of Enlightenment rationalism. And the idea, in a nutshell, behind the Enlightenment is that the individual man, using his own reason, could be at least as authoritative as tradition. So from the beginning of time up until about this time, the scientific revolution itself in the 17th century, up until this point, tradition was effectively the epistemic authority. And, for someone to, win an argument or something like that, up until this point, for the most part, with some notable exceptions in the classical world, basically what you would be doing is you'd be pointing to scripture, or you'd be pointing to, a very prominent interpreter of scripture, or in the pagan world, you'd be pointing to something like Homer or whatever. And basically, this would be the end of the argument, really. If you'd try to outquote the other guy in Homer or something like that, and whoever had the best interpretation of this traditional epistemic authority would basically win the argument, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. This changes in the Enlightenment era after the scientific revolution. The individual using his own reason, starting from his own self-evident axioms, became this new authoritative epistemic authority. And in fact, the abstract individual was in a position not only to be his own authority, but he was in a position to actually critique the tradition itself. So over the 18th century, this ideology of scientism basically got shriller and more hysterical, especially in France, but everywhere in Europe, of course. And it culminated in the revolutions, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and then on through the 19th century to the age of revolutions, culminating in the year 1848, which is where basically Europe just exploded into revolution everywhere. So that's the background. That's the Enlightenment. What Romanticism is it is a reaction against this. Instead of taking this Enlightenment rationalism to absurd levels, it reacts against that. And Romanticism is very often characterized as the introduction of intense emotion into especially aesthetics, because of course when we're talking about Romanticism, we're not just talking about philosophy, we're not just talking about literature and things like that. We're talking about art in a lot of cases. The romantic movement as a, well, let's just say for now, as a non-rational movement, leaned very heavily on aesthetic, the aesthetic experience as important to the human condition. So of course, this is going to have something to do with intense emotions and things that are below the surface, not exactly motivations that we understand. A lot of it is sort of leading towards something like a Freudian interpretation, where a lot of what drives us is kind of unknown to us. So this is kind of where Romanticism is heading. So yeah, I think that's a good place to kind of like leave that, and I'll get your reaction to that and see where you think of it.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think Romanticism proper, like Romanticism as the movement, the art movement, because we could say there's so many things that the term romantic gets applied to that isn't really romantic. And then also the modern interpretation of Romanticism, I think, is fake and gay, and we can get into that. But when we talk about what Romanticism is, we have to kind of like look at the word, what romantic means, right? The word romantic, when people think in common parlance today, when you think of romantic, you think of people falling in love. You think of the paperback books that your aunt gets at the grocery store with Fabio on the front. You think of like Lifetime Originals or all that stuff.
Yeah.
Romantic doesn't really mean that. A romance, and this is something that's in fiction all over the place. A lot of the early fiction stuff, like for example, like they didn't used to call things science fiction. They used to call them planetary romances, even if there was no love involved. There's just some guy running around the outer space blasting aliens. Romance it comes from the Germans and stuff would call a novel or a story I don't want to use the word fiction, but they would pretty much call any sort of narrative, a literary narrative, a Roman. They would say this is a Roman, right? And this is where the term romantic comes from in terms of art. It is that which demonstrates a narrative, and more specifically, a narrative that is mythopoetic. This is something that is absolutely crucial to Romanticism as a whole, is its attachment to mythopoetics. So when we look at Romanticism as a movement, a lot of people, there's criticism that comes from all over the place saying that it was an extension of Enlightenment philosophy. Some people say it was this or that. And then, modern, the fake and gay modern interpretation it was all about individual feeling and this and that. That's not really what it was, right? If you took like modern lit crit or artsy fartsy institutional college douchebag art teachers, art professors, and like you put them in front of the guys that actually came up with the early works that inspired the Romantic movement, they would like look at them like they got two fucking heads. They'd be like, "What are you guys even talking about? That's not what we're doing." Romanticism was an expression of the folk soul in reaction to both the kind of bland, nitpicky persnicketyness of what Mike just called like the scientism, right? But also neoclassicism, right? It was a reaction against the Mike, I think you called it paint by numbers approach, the mathematical approach of early neoclassicism, and it went back to this kind of raw spiritual. I don't want to say emotional, because in modern times, when we say emotional, we think of, oh, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm this, I'm that. And we think of this like introspective, faggoty kind of artsy fartsy bullshit. And that's not what it means. Emotion, it means like this raw display of like frustration and, folk soul is effectively what it was. And it kind of disregarded a lot of the mathematical approach to art that preceded it, and it said we're just going to go off of raw talent. We're just going to spit out what's in our hearts and our souls and stuff like that. And that's and that's my take on what Romanticism was and what it meant back then.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to characterize it. I mean, like there is some truth to, like, as always, there's a grain of truth to the conventional explanation of Romanticism as intense emotionality. I mean, yes, that's true. This is kind of like saying Shakespeare is a bunch of folk tales, which is also true, right? It's just a shitty low-res explanation. We can do a lot better than that. And I think, like anything, to really grasp it, you kind of have to explain it historically. So let me take a run at this and see if I can make this clear. What actually went into this movement, which is an aesthetic movement and an intellectual movement and a movement in the sciences and all these things. So we have to look at the Sturm und Drang movement, which was a German. It was an aesthetic movement to begin with, in literary circles especially, where they focused on nature and subjectivity and, of course, intense emotion. And you've got names like Goethe and Schiller involved in this Sturm und Drang movement, which stands for, the term actually translates to storm and stress, right? These are stories and poems and paintings and everything that capture heroism. They capture the extremes of human experience. This movement loves the unclassifiable. This is kind of to give you a general idea of the aesthetic that they're going for here. And of course, this grows into German Romanticism. This is the Sturm und Drang is the sort of proto-Romanticism, grows into German Romanticism, which is, for my money, this is Romanticism proper, really. It's Romanticism par excellence. So the early Romantics, especially in German Romanticism, they were really looking for a kind of primitive unity in society. And they found it in the Middle Ages. These people loved medieval shit, basically. Yeah. Like this is kind of what they viewed as the ideal kind of society, the ideal aesthetic. And it was kind of a reaction against the, like you said, against the neoclassicism that was in vogue at that point. Later Romantics sort of moved on to something a little different. They kind of accepted the agonistic tension in the world, like the war of all against all in some sense, storm and stress, right? And they wanted to contrast the everyday with kind of the explosiveness of the creative genius. And eventually, Romanticism tried to put all these, this witch's brew of elements kind of into on a firm foundation. And there was a few figures that I think are worth going through here that sort of give you the intellectual foundations for Romanticism, because this is far from just being, guys throwing paint at a canvas and just being, all about their emotions, right? Like these were serious intellectuals. And so, basically, what the first one I think that we have to talk about, maybe the most important, is this fellow by the name of Johann Gottfried von Herder. He was an 18th century German linguist who wasn't having this Grecophilia shit anymore. He went a long way to making the Germans proud of their own language, of their own culture, of their own history, right? Because you think about this, the Germans at this point in the 18th century, he's in the second half of the 18th century, which is say late 1700s, very much in love with the classical world, very much in love with like what we now call the Renaissance. Germans were in their art tastes, they were Italian. In their literary tastes, they were mostly French. But actual German, like native German expressions, were kind of forgotten about in a very large extent. And here comes Herder, and he wants to point to the Gothic as something worth having, right? And by Gothic, we mean like everything that's kind of like bespoke and one-off and particular. Like if you look at these Gothic cathedrals, they're incredibly detailed. And if you look at the details, they're these like Baroque, and by Baroque, I don't mean like, ordered. They're almost a very kind of disordered, there's a kind of hurly-burly, like hodgepodge of elements going on. Like you get like these Gothic like gargoyles and stuff like that. It is anything but classical, right? He wants to point to that as a worthy aesthetic. And Herder's big idea is that what he says, language is the organ of thought. So language conditions and shapes thought to a much, much greater degree than was supposed until this time. And Herder was also, he was an ultra-nationalist. He developed the theory of the folk as distinguished by their geography, their tradition, their language, and their blood, above all by their history. And this is his other big idea, the volksgeist, which translates to the folk spirit. So we have something kind of like the esprit de corps here. It's an indefinable spirit of a people that basically gives rise to their art, their philosophy, their culture, and their history. And he found it very much in bad taste that the Germans were rejecting their own Volksgeist and trying to basically import high culture from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. The Volksgeist is something that's historically conditioned. It's communicated by the blood. It's really a people's whole history kind of like condensed, right? And this is a very corporative psychology. It's a psychological family resemblance between members of the same folk. So that's Herder. And then the next figure I think that it's important to talk about is Johann Georg Hamann, who is actually the teacher of Herder, and in some ways deeper than him, but a kind of a more of a trickster kind of figure, a lot harder to pin down. He's highly critical of abstract reason. He wrote a really important critique of Immanuel Kant's metaphysics that sort of puts language upstream of thought, like just in the same way that Herder did. And his big idea is that, as he even said, reason is language, which is absolutely monstrous to an Enlightenment thinker, right? His idea is that reason is actually conditioned by language, which is exactly the thing that reason is trying to abstract away language, right? Reason is trying to get clear on what is true before language even comes into the picture. And Haman comes in and says, nope, you're never going to do it. Language always conditions reason. The terms in which you think essentially dictate your thought, right? And then Haman, he critiques Kant's deduction of the categories of reason by critiquing Kant's use of language. Like Kant imports a whole bunch of Greek terms like a priori, a posteriori, synthetic, analytic, this kind of thing into German. And then he pretends like he's using categories that are universal instead of shit that he just pulled from some other canon, right? Haman points this out, and then he uses language performatively to argue against Kant. He makes like a dazzling use of obscure allusions and references, and he basically sort of like, in order to engage with Haman at all, you have to know the tradition inside and out. So it's like he's kind of a slippery figure. He's very, very interesting, and he leads on to Friedrich Karl von Savigny, who is a major figure in the historical school of jurisprudence. Basically, he does what Herder and Haman are doing with language, and he does it for law. He takes the concept of the volksgeist and applies it to law, where law is the organic expression of a folk. The law grows up out of a particular people. It's a historical product. It's an expression of those people. It can't just be copy pasted from like one folk to the next. This would be insane, right? It'd be like copy pasting like a rabbit's diet onto a bodybuilder or something. Like it's just ridiculous. And Savigny was opposed to natural law philosophy, the idea that there's one law that applies to all and is fitted to every people. So he's got this radically particularist legal philosophy. It sees different folks as inherently different and irreconcilable. It's also like the others. It's like a collective, very collective philosophy. The folk is an aggregate of individuals, and it's more than the sum of its parts. It's really like the folk is actually a historical being. It's a kind of super organism that has its existence in time and is basically conditioned by history. The folk comes before the state. The state, especially in terms of law, is to be organized around the folk and not the other way. This is very different from the Enlightenment. And Savigny has a couple of students that most people actually know, and these are the brothers Grimm.
Yeah.
They studied under him, but instead of going into law, they, of course, became folklorists. They applied the concept of the Volksgeist to the study of their own German folk culture. They went around, they collected like traditional German folk tales and stories. They analyzed them, they categorized them. And a lot of people don't even realize this, but they also made major linguistic contributions to like Indo-European studies as well. The Grimms, these guys, the brothers Grimm, recognized the deep antiquity of these folk tales and connected many of them with what are called, even today in Germany, the Indo-Germanics, which we call the Indo-Europeans. These guys understood that it was the folk spirit, the Volksgeist, that had generated this folk culture, these folk tales. They were not literary products, which is an idea that like even persists today, actually, that like someone dreamt this up like a few hundred years ago. No, it turns out that these folk tales are actually thousands of years old. So you kind of get the idea. All of these different thinkers very much concerned with the particularity of the folk, very much concerned with historicity as opposed to universality, and very particularized in their thought. So it's very far from being a, just about sort of like, hippy dippy, whatever, man, just like do your thing. It's like your emotions, bro. Like none of like, this is bullshit. It's a very, very serious and grounded approach to aesthetics and law and philosophy.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on the brothers Grimm. I was going to talk about them too. There's so much that comes out of Romanticism. The period of Romanticism was profound, not just profoundly inspirational, was foundational to building up into what we would understand today to be nationalism and the ideas that come along with nationalism. Without Romanticism, there is no nationalism. These guys are considered romantic authors. Thomas Carlyle is considered a romantic author. I would definitely say, if you've read The Heroes and Hero Worship, his writing on that is very
romantic text. Yeah, for sure.
It's it's like masculine, it's in your face and everything like that. But it's about let's go back to the etymology of the word romantic. Romantic comes from the word Rome, right? We talk about they used to call narrative pieces Romans. Well, what does Rome mean? Well, the etymology, if you follow the etymology of Rome, you got the story of Romulus and Remus, but the etymology of Rome comes from a word that means apex, right? It means like the peak, the top, or the top of the hill or the mountain or something like that. The apex, the zenith is what this means. And also there's a lot of words that branch off of it that go into having to do with music. He who plays music. There's a word that comes from it that's in Sanskrit. What was it? It's called like Dombrin or something like that. And it means he who makes sound or he who makes music. So this idea of the hero of these romantic archetypes that they were bringing up go back to this. They believe that in the folk soul is the apex, is the very top. This is the peak of being. This is the peak of identity. And this is what they wanted to tap into. So when you go back and you read guys like Carlyle, I would say, he was in this time period, and obviously he has some stuff that kind of goes away from it. But you could certainly say that a lot of Nietzsche's writings were very romantic, right?
Absolutely.
Probably in my mind, when I think of like American romantic, I think of Edgar Allan Poe. These guys were writing, they were medievalists. And, as Mike mentioned, go look at like the Cologne Cathedral in Germany. Look at some of this architecture. Architecture, unfortunately, is an art form that we don't really talk about with art because, modernity, etc. But architecture is absolutely an art form. Look at the architecture that cropped up, inspired by people that were romantics. It is, as Mike said, it's very dark, it's very gritty, it's very medieval. It has all of these different elements that come from the folk soul. And at face value, it might appear that these things are kind of disordered, or they're kind of picking pieces out of time to create this hodgepodge. But in reality, what they're doing is they're taking all of these romantic, these apex, these heroic things, these archetypes that tell a story, that tell a narrative, that demonstrate something that is from the mythopoetic current, and they're putting it together into one big thrust. And what this was demonstrating is this wasn't about individualism, as what the modern art critics would say. This was a rejection of Enlightenment, rejection of scientism. It was about something very primordial. It was about the expression of human beauty, and this ideology survives. The romantic ideas survive into the 1900s in literature. Obviously, guys like Tolkien. Tolkien was absolutely a romantic. C.S. Lewis, romantic. H.P. Lovecraft, probably the biggest romantic of that era, right?
Yeah.
These guys were talking about this. Like, for example, one of Lovecraft's most famous quotes that comes out of his essay, Supernatural Horror in Literature, he says, the only thing a wonder story can ever be is the depiction of a certain type of human mood. And what he's describing here is not necessarily mood like, oh, I'm happy, I'm sad, or whatever. What he's describing is all a wonder story can ever be. And when he says wonder story, he's talking about his genre of fiction, but this could also be applied to any type of storytelling, because storytelling is what defines a folk's identity. It is what tells the story of your people. It is the mythopoetics. And this can be applied to a wonder story as well. And what he's saying is all that it can ever be is depicting a certain type, a certain atmosphere of human mood, effectively going along with the romantic idea that that there is particularity, right? That all that it can ever be is based on your perception, how you conceive reality, how you perceive reality, and how you interact with reality. That language and the folk soul precede rationality and precede logic and precede these things, right? So this is what a lot of these guys later on were getting at too. They were very much still in the same vein of thought.
Yeah, very much so. It's a very anti-rationalist philosophy. I hesitate to say irrationalist because that comes with a whole host of connotations.
Yeah.
But it is definitely a rejection of Enlightenment rationalism. And it unfortunately sometimes, and in fact, not just sometimes, it may actually even be, I would say it's probably the standard take is that like Romanticism is a kind of species of liberal ideology because I don't know, I guess like in order to express these like deep currents of like chthonic forces that are sort of roiling beneath the surface, somehow that's a liberal thing. I think that this is something that needs to be dispelled actually.
Yeah.
And the way to dispel it is to underscore historicism as an important aspect of the Romantic approach to life and art and now all of this stuff. This is, of course, historicism being one of the most consistent themes in Romantic thinking. I mean, we could talk a little bit about, like, is historicism really actually illiberal? I think it is. But, anyway, just sort of to talk about it a bit here. Generally, the idea that history conditions modes of thought and being, it's there sort of like from the beginning and like especially like working up to the more systematic and philosophical Romantic writings. It's there. Like to be an Englishman or an American or an Eskimo or whatever is just to be a creature that's embedded in a history, right? And contrast this with Enlightenment rationalism, where like what's highest is really actually what's independent of time and space, or even like the subject himself. And you can get a pretty clear breakdown of liberal versus illiberal in my view. Liberal being much more rationalist. You've got the solitary thinker who starts from his own premises, self-evident, at least to him. He wants to be able to write, the French Constitution out of nothing. He will discover a scientific truth just by thinking about it. Creating a work of art out of his own unique genius or whatever. The liberal is, of course, liberated from the background assumptions that make up his culture. This is the freedom that sort of underscores liberalism. Contrast that to the illiberal, who is historicist. The illiberal he's entangled with his background. He can't actually finally separate himself from the background. For him, history is actually what conditions reason. This is what Hamann was getting at with his metacritique of Kant, which is why supposedly objective reason, because history conditions reason. This is why throughout history, if you look, supposedly objective reason has been used to justify very, very different things all throughout history, right? Mm-hmm. Like you would think that these would converge moving through time, but they absolutely don't. And of course, for the historicist, for the illiberal, tradition is the source of authority. Tradition is nothing more than just the aggregated experience of a folk over millions of lifetimes. You can kind of think of it almost as like a super empiricism, where tradition is just this accumulated knowledge and wisdom of billions upon billions of man hours of experience. But even more fundamentally than that, historicism is just who we are as peoples. It's who we've always been, with very, very short and catastrophic punctuations between, right? From the very beginning, we've been as we are historicizing peoples from the earliest times. When we sang songs of the deeds of our heroes, this is who we've been. We've been people who look back to the deeds of our ancestors, and this was recaptured in the Romantic period, and especially in German Romanticism. So I think that this is something very special that deserves. I mean, of course, this is not an obscure movement by any stretch. Everybody knows who Goethe is. Everybody knows who Edgar Allan Poe is, and all of these, Wordsworth, and all of these, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. These are not obscure figures, but still, I still don't think that it could be sufficiently underlined what an important development this was after Enlightenment rationalism. And really, I think it prefigures what we are in the modern nationalist right. These are our guys, basically. So yeah, I think that we was historicists is a very defensible thesis.
Yeah, I would agree completely. For me, Romanticism is effectively like, let me tell you the story of our people. That's what that means. And what is different about people, and I think that the spirit of Romanticism lives on today in a lot of people that do art. And there's a very stark difference between those that come from this romantic worldview again versus more modern artists, right? I have this archetype, and I'm actually going to do a big talk about this pretty soon. But I have this archetype that I absolutely hate. I just call it the selfish artist, right? It is the end product of liberalism and Enlightenment, modernism, postmodernism, et cetera, and we've been dunking on it the whole show here. The guy that makes art because it's for me, it's an expression of myself, it's my inner whatever. It's I make music that's just for me. It's completely self-indulgent and selfish, and that is not romantic at all. That has nothing to do with romanticism. That's just jerking yourself off, and it is completely a product of Enlightenment philosophy. He's coming with the presupposition that he is liberated from a tradition. He is liberated from a history. He is liberated from these things. He's an individual, and he makes art for himself. And somebody with a romantic mind, somebody that comes from a romantic background or has and most people, I think, don't even really know the ins and outs and bits and bobs of what makes them a romantic. They just come with that mindset. They don't view themselves as separated from their people or their history or their culture or their language. They don't view themselves as liberated. And in fact, they embrace that. They embrace those constraints. I don't even want to call it constraints. They embrace that flavor that has been thrusted upon them, and they're proud of it. And what they do is with their methodology of creating art, it isn't about this personal expression. It is about thrusting upon the viewer an experience. They come with the approach of, I am a skald, I am a bard, I am an entertainer, I am a poet. I am here to entertain you, to excite you, to make you feel something. I am here to show you the beauty of the human experience, whether it be sadness or destruction or love or war or nature or whatever. I am here to show you the spirit of my people through my art. And this is something that is prevalent in all of the art that we love and think is great. Everything from Wagner to watching, I don't know, Ronnie James Dio music videos, right? This is a spirit that appears in all of this. You don't think about yourself when you create. You are thinking about the viewer, the audience, and you are channeling the volksgeist through your art. You are the conduit for your volksgeist.
Yeah, oh, definitely. This is like that archetype that you mentioned of the selfish artist could not be further away from this romantic ideal, right? Because there's actually one of my favorite Platonic dialogues, and I shit on Plato all the time, but the fact is he has some very interesting things to say, very worthwhile things to say. I mean, you don't become a huge part of the Western canon, unless you're doing that. But one of his dialogues that I really appreciate is this one called Ion, which is basically a dialogue between Socrates and a rhapsode, who is basically that's the Greek bard, right? These are the guys that would go and actually recite Homer over the course of 3 days or something like that. And one of the upshots of Ion is that the bard is not actually in control. He's not the one he's not in the driver's seat. The bard is really a tool of the poet that he recites, right? He's not the one that's actually doing it, right? Whereas the selfish artist is the one, it's his own. He is his own muse. There's like this very masturbatory sort of dynamic that's going on with the selfish artist that you're talking about. Very, very different from this expression of the volksgeist coming out of the deep recesses of the folk soul. And I think that anybody who is like a musician or an artist that has like really actually that's good at what they do understands what this is like when you are possessed by an idea. It's not you that's moving things. You are a tool that is being wielded by something else. And for guys who actually are musicians or are playwrights or are authors or whatever, when you get this idea, when the thing just kind of hits you from nowhere, you can't rest. You can't do anything until you get it down, until you write it down or you record it or you somehow just get it out, right? It's almost like, giving birth, right?
Exactly.
It's absolutely, it's like an itch that you can't scratch until it happens. Like I have this weird thing. It's been a while since I've written a lot of music. I still do on occasion, but boy, when I was really doing it, one of the things that would happen to me, and I've never heard this happen to anybody else, my creative process, so to speak, is that sometimes I would get a song, like, I'd be like, I would be having a dream, and in the dream, I'd be going, my dream would be like, I'm at a concert of like my favorite band, and I like listen, I'm at the concert, and then they kick into like my favorite song. I'm like, this fucking rules. This is the best song. Like, this is my favorite tune by these guys. And then I would wake up and I would sort of like, be groggy for a few seconds and be like, what song was that again? And then I'd like really think about it and be like, fuck, that band never played. That's not something that just, it's not a real song. And then I would like kick off my bed covers, I run over to my guitar, usually like, half naked, and just be like, and I have to transcribe it, right? Just instantly. And whenever this would happen, which it happened all the time, like I probably got like a dozen songs this way. They were always the best songs that I had ever written. If I was lucky, I would get lyrics too. And this is just like, these things are not driven by us at their best. Artistic and creative endeavor is something that it comes from somewhere else and it channels through you, right? This is how it works in the Romantic idiom. This is what the Sturm und Drang people were getting at, right? With this unfettered creative impulse that flows through you. There's nothing individualistic about it at all. And anyway, yeah, what you mentioned there about the selfish artist who's just there basically to like jerk himself off. I just wanted to draw a very, very distinct line between those two things because they couldn't be more different, really.
Yeah, I can't stand the selfish artist needs to be strangled. It just completely needs to be strangled. It is.
It's just a formula for getting shitty art. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's all that it is. And let me tell you.
But on the other hand, I could say, sorry, I'll say this very quickly in defense, I guess, of the selfish artist, is that there's a sense in which people who are like, I just do it for myself, I don't care what other people think, is kind of like, I think what it's supposed to be is it's supposed to be a check on the sort of like bourgeois, guy who basically just like the sellout, right? That just makes music because for money, basically, right? So I think that it's a good corrective against that, but it goes too far very, very easily.
Yeah, there is a difference between somebody who values their power as an entertainer. It's like, I don't know how to really articulate it, but as an entertainer, it's not about the money. It is about the money because you want to make money. Everybody's got to eat, but it's also not about you. It is about this like exchange of power or something, right? It is about I get like high on, and I do this with everything. I being somebody, I played music, I write, I am a guy I do pretty much all kinds of art except for drawing, because I'm terrible at illustration. I can't draw for shit. But I get high on giving somebody a reaction, even if I'm just in conversation, making people laugh, just like cracking jokes and making people laugh, making a stranger that I have no idea who they are, making them laugh. It gets me high, because it's not about anything other than it's like this exchange of power or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to me intuitively. I mean, to be able to make somebody laugh is in a sense to have a power over them, and it's not a bad thing. It's not like, a malicious, like I have power over you and I control you kind of thing. I mean, it's something good, right? It's the same power that the entertainer, that the musician has, that to just keep you enraptured, right? And that makes sense to me, definitely.
Yeah, it's not like a Machiavellian thing or anything like that. It's you are like sharing in this almost like
you're holding court, right?
Yeah.
Like that makes sense.
Yeah, it's almost like a ritual. And there's also like a little bit of it, like an altruistic thing about it, right? Like when you make somebody laugh, or you entertain them, or you write a story and they hit you. It's like you have helped them escape from the mundane into a place that transcends time and material reality, just for a brief period. You're almost like a doctor. It's almost like how a doctor feels good about healing his patients. That's the same kind of thing. And this is what Romanticism did, the art forms did, is that they thrusted you into a sacred space, into an immersive world. You look at the cathedrals, you look at the paintings, you read the stories, you like all of the stuff that has to do with Romanticism. When you view it for a brief second, you are thrusted into another world, and you are like forced to have these feelings that remind you what it means to be human. Whether it is sadness, whether it's rage, whether it's love, whether it's like excitement or passion, or just whatever, just these things that make the human experience unique. And it comes from a very spiritual, primordial, and ancestral place. And I absolutely adore what is behind Romanticism and everything like that. But there are some criticisms of it. And we kind of talked about a lot of it. And some of the later Romanticism stuff can be hit with these criticisms. Just to be fair, it can. But there is this kind of dichotomy that gets painted of like Romanticism versus Futurism. And I'm not sure what exactly I think about this kind of dichotomy. Mike, what do you think about the Futurism versus Romanticism? Do you think they are actually opposed?
In a way, they kind of are. In that Romanticism tends to, well, shall we say, romanticize the past in a lot of senses, and nature as well. And Futurism is in some sense opposed, of course, to the past, but also to nature in its own way, where nature is this sort of like raw force that threatens to kind of like break in on, the technocratic kind of aesthetic that futurism wants to put forward. There is, of course, in the end, no real dichotomy between technology and nature, because, of course, the human world is part of nature, including technology. But in a restricted sense, yeah, there is a bit of a dichotomy there, because what technology is kind of doing is it's sort of staving off the natural. Like I think if there can be an alternative to nature, it has to be in something like artifice. So yeah, and of course, Romanticism is very much concerned with nature. This is an important part of it. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that Futurism is like is 100% in opposition to Romanticism, but there's definitely a tendency. There's a kind of tendency that like drives the two apart to some extent.
Yeah, I would. I agree with all that. I think. If you take it like the high res, you take a step back at the wide scope, look at it. They're not really. It's not really a thing. But I think people draw that because it's like one's trying to go back, the other's trying to go forward. And I wouldn't even say that Romanticism is necessarily trying to go back. I don't think it's like this nostalgic fetishism, right? I would actually accuse neoclassicism of being some that kind of thing, because while neoclassicism, if you go look at the art from neoclassicism, it was it was beautiful, right? It was very skilled, it was beautiful, and everything like that.
Some of it's actually quite amazing, not to disparage it.
Yeah, it's tremendous stuff, right? But it was rigid, right? It didn't have the same passion. It didn't have the same rawness that Romanticism did. But I would accuse neoclassicism of being, we are going to do it like these people back then, exactly to the T. And in fact, we're going to make it formulaic and we are going to just replicate it. And I think that was like, that could be criticized as being like fetishist, like retro fetishist or whatever. Whereas Romanticism, in my opinion, was very present minded. And you can see this, like we mentioned, in the architecture. They were taking bits and pieces of all of these great time periods and putting them together into one combobulated form, right? So this is like, I don't know. I don't think that. I think that the thing of Romanticism being this like, oh, well, you're just nostalgic for the past kind of critique is completely missing the mark and misunderstanding it.
Yeah, no, I see where that's coming from. Definitely. I mean, the thing is that the folk soul, the volksgeist, the folk spirit, is something that kind of doesn't really change through time. So there's a sense in which time is kind of unreal for it. The folk spirit is the same now as it was 1,000 years ago, as it will be in 1,000 years from now. So to say that like Futurism is like anti-Romanticism is kind of missing the point, because like the folk soul kind of is held constant, like from like time in a sense. So yeah, I don't think that it's incompatible at all. But I do think that it's important to understand it in terms of like a historical historicism, and this is not necessarily contra the future in any way at all, because of course, where did German Romanticism go? Well, it went into the Third Reich, basically, and this was a very futuristic movement, of course, in its way. It was a romantic futuristic movement. So these two things can be reconciled and have been reconciled. But I think it's important to understand it in terms of historicism. That is the connection with who we have been, right? Because who we are going to be is an extension of that. So there's really, at the end of the day, there's no real there's no real dichotomy there. And historicism has a tendency to underscore things that you can't change. And I think that this is the important takeaway from historicism as a mode of romanticism. That basically it emphasizes those brute facts that you didn't get to choose, right? Which is another way of saying that historicism at least radically downplays and maybe even rejects the idea of freedom, which is, I think, something it's a hard pill for a lot of us to swallow. And it's very much in contrast to the idea that romanticism is just like, do what you feel like, and it's your emotions and all that, right? Realistically, I think that like this freedom is very much more of an Enlightenment thing. Especially, you can see that in Kant, because for Kant, when he was asked to sum up the Enlightenment in a word, he actually chose freedom. That was his one-word description. He said, "Sapere aude," dare to be wise, think for yourself. But so this is for Kant what the Enlightenment is about. The Enlightenment is freedom. But what is the opposite of freedom? If we're going to say that romanticism is a rejection of that, is it slavery? Well, no. The opposite of freedom is, and I've said this before in Telegram and in Twitter and all this, the opposite of freedom is not slavery, but heritage. Your heritage is all those things that go into making you up that you didn't choose, right? Like it's your parentage, it's your language and your society and your culture and your religion. Above all, the most unchosen thing is your history. These things are all your heritage. And to whatever extent that you inherited them, you weren't free to choose them. And you can sort of see the difference between these two values, heritage and freedom, in the distinction between these two modes of society called Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. These are actually two terms that were coined in the late 19th century, so toward the very end of the Romantic period. But you could see that the Romantics were everywhere very much sort of stood for one over the other. So Gemeinschaft was the society that's united in ties of common history and culture and blood. Social bonds were inherited and permanent. This is the traditional society. It's a society that's based on an attitude. The relationship that people have to each other is based on affection and feeling. And on the other side of that coin is Gesellschaft. This is a society that emphasizes individualism and economic relations. Social bonds in this society are all voluntary and revocable, right? This is basically the liberal society. The society is based on consent. The social relationships there are a kind of transaction. You can think of like Rousseau's social contract theory, and you kind of have the idea there. And there's a sense in which the Gesellschaft, that is the liberal society, is actually kind of stronger. It's based on reason and choice, and of course, reason is not without its virtues. Reason makes these societies flexible and easily able to kind of like scale and adapt to changes and whatnot. But this is also why these same like liberal consensual societies are weak. They're based on this paper thin sense of identity. They're unstable. They're fractious and disunited. They're that kind of not really societies as much as they are sort of temporary alliances. And as soon as loyalties kind of shift, which they always are, because everyone considers himself an individual, the alliances kind of have to be redrawn over again anew, right? So these Gesellschaft societies, they tend to be short-lived, but I mean, if we're being fair, I mean, they can be quite glorious too. You could think of like classical Athens or something like that, if you want an ancient version. So you can kind of understand why the Romantics wanted to find the primitive unity of the Middle Ages, as I mentioned before, right? A pure Gemeinschaft society, the pure traditional society where bonds of loyalty are organic, social roles are inherited and unchosen. And you can understand why they would emphasize pure emotion over reason, right? Because ultimately, it's the affective side of our nature. It's the emotional, instinctual side of our nature that produces strong social bonds. We relate to each other through the kind of heroic the like romantic epic narratives and figures that stand for our societies. Like, we know who we are because we are the people that produced a Lancelot or a King Arthur. We relate to each other through the Siegfrieds and the Achilles and the Horatiuses and the Beowulfs and things like that. This is what makes a society strong and youthful and vital, this pre-rational, instinctual side of us, the kind of dark forces moving below the threshold of consciousness. These are the things that do everything. Reason's job is really, in the end, just to rationalize them. And this is what the Romantics were aiming at. So I think, to call what the Romantics were doing intense emotion or whatever, it's not quite wrong, but it just trivializes and undersells the depth and importance of the contribution that this thing made. I saw someone say somewhere that Romanticism is the angry teenager of the aesthetic world, which is that it's just so trivializing, right? It's really more like the rebirth of the founding god than anything else.
I hate that. Was it youthful? Yeah, it was. Was it aggressive? Yes, it was. Was it brash and emotional? Yes, it was. But like saying that that's just like nah. And I'll tell you what, speaking of the dark forces that lie with under the threshold of consciousness, and that being the folk soul. I have found that people that consider themselves creatures of reason and creatures of rationality are very rarely that, right? They operate from knee-jerk reactions and then backwards engineer rationality around it. It's just like how everybody does everything all the time. There's always an agenda that comes from, I like this or I don't like this. And I actually think that the people that criticize Romanticism, like as we just went through, we just kind of debunked all of their critiques about it. It's not even that they're basing it off of a critique. I think they just fundamentally just don't like it because they don't have they don't have like a psychological profile that it appeals to them. Right? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, for the most part, the objections and not even just to Romanticism, the objections to paganism, the objections to, frankly, to Christianity, the objections to the modern world, the objections to the ancient world. Typically, all of these things are aesthetic first and then rational later, right? The reasons that we have to dislike these things tend to follow the aesthetic preferences. And this is a hard pill to swallow for us, right? Because what it means is that most of our shit is totally irrational. But that's just the way it is. This is what makes people tick, right? And this is not to say that the reasons for things don't matter. They absolutely do matter, but they just don't come first. That's all, right? And I think that what the Romantics were doing was they were just admitting that to themselves. If we're going to be irrational about these things, at least we could be like, not unwittingly so, right? And I hate the word irrational because it makes it's the second term. It's a derivative term of the rationality, which is supposedly like the first construct. Realistically, I think we would be talking more about something like primordial or something that's at least pre-rational. It's like there are these, like I say, these chthonic forces below the surface that move and do everything. And what the Romantics did was they just basically admitted that to themselves and went with that, right? And in so doing, they created nationalism. They created basically all of the aesthetic experiences that we love, right? Like the nationalistic music, like Wagner from the 19th century. sort of set the tone for modern poetry in its best aspect. There's a lot of shit modern poetry, but there's also some very, very wonderful modern and modernist poetry as well. And what's good in it comes out of Romanticism, I think. There's so many things that come out of it. Even modern philosophy. Hegel is a child of the Romantic period. All of these things it really is the big bang for a lot of stuff that was very influential and very good. And ultimately, I think it's the big bang for us as a movement. And this is why these are our guys, and this is why it's important to really defend them and to defend it as an aesthetic and an intellectual movement.
Exactly. And I look at a lot of modern stuff that guys really like. For example, Warhammer 40K. Guys in our thing love 40K. I like 40K a lot. I think it's really entertaining. Warhammer 40K is loaded with romantic themes. You could say that it is I don't want to use post-romantic, but it's like a neo-romantic. I guess there was already a neo. Whatever. It is romantic. You got it is in the grim dark of the far future, there is only war, right? And it's all about this grim dark setting where there is a great king and they have to survive against these aliens, right? The Xenos, right? That they have to purge. Those are the outsiders that don't have the same folk soul as humanity, right? And there's tons of Gothic architecture in it. Even the spaceships look like they're out of the Middle Ages, right? So it's like this entire thing has Romanticism all over it. You read the books, and the Space Marines, who are the heroes, have these great speeches about self-sacrifice and at war with nature, and how the void of space is going to swallow them. They're at the mercy of the chaos gods, and it's so romantic, top to bottom. It is a planetary romance. So Romanticism, it was not like this like fringe thing that happened and or it was this old thing that happened and it was over and now we're doing something else. It's still alive. It never stopped. And in fact, it grew out this emergent web that's spreading roots. Pretty much everything that we talk about here on Culture Dads, we talk a lot like animated movies or music or whatever. All of that was inspired by Romanticism, at least in my opinion.
Oh yeah, very much so. And I mean, in a sense, it kind of runs together. Romanticism runs together with a lot of other things that are important to us because it is just one expression. It's one aspect of a thing that has been getting born and reborn and born and reborn over and over again for at least half a millennium now, and maybe longer than that, since we kind of lost our originary folk traditions, since we started to move away from them. And when I, in that sort of little spiel that I gave before about, all those different thinkers from the Romantic period, Herder and Grimm and all that, as you go through these guys, it kind of gets closer and closer to the Indo-European Urheimat. In all these thinkers, you can see a kind of move toward the rebirth of an archaic folk soul. It's the rebirth of something truly ancient, something originary to us as European peoples. And it grows and it branches and it ramifies through the 20th century, and that gets cut off all of a sudden after World War II. And then it springs back up again spontaneously in the wake of Trump, in the form of the alt-right. We are the heirs of Herder and the Grimms, and these are our guys. And there are earlier precedents too. Romanticism is not the Big Bang. This is something that's been struggling to be reborn for a long time. And what it is ultimately is it's the rebirth of the Aryan or the Indo-European folk soul. the Aryan was the man who saw himself as embedded in his folk. You know, this is a word that keeps coming back through this whole thing, folk, right? This guy, the Indo-European man 5,000 years ago, he sang the songs of the deeds of his fathers. You know, he reckoned his identity by his lineage. He would have been a man who considers himself the son of so-and-so, who was the son of so-and-so, right? It's just by reference to this past, to the history, that he had any idea of himself at all. So, and like when people in the modern West say, I am, and then like it's followed by something, usually what it's followed by is like a job title or political ideology or something like that. But for the primordial Indo-European man, the I am was followed by, you know, a father or a son or a mother or an uncle or an aunt or a grandson or whatever. These people define themselves by reference to the whole, by reference to their folk, which is just to say that they define themselves by reference to their history. The primordial Indo-European man, he saw the most important things in himself as those things that he didn't choose, right? His identity was not a proposition that he could accept or decline. And it certainly was not something that he had arrived at by reason. His identity was this network of relationships to things that long predated himself. It was a network of relationships to his gods, to his kin, to his language, to his songs, to his culture. At the end of the day, I don't shirk at saying that the primordial man of our people was a historicist. For him, history was something much more immediate and organic than it is for us. But he was a historicist in a very recognizable way. For him, he was part of history himself. He would have considered the songs of his fathers as involving himself. And this is all just to say that our primordial man was a kind of romantic, or even better, that Romanticism is the rebirth of his spirit. It wasn't the first. It wasn't the last, but it was a real landmark in the tide kind of turning against liberalism. And there's something beautiful that in the darkest time, right in the midst of the French Revolution, right at the height of liberalism, such a rebirth of this primordial spirit was possible. And it's still possible today. And in fact, I think we are at the vanguard of it. So it's something to be celebrated.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with. I love all that. And I'll tell you what, I see it. Actually, just before the show, I saw a meme in some chat. It was like one of the "my feelings don't care about your facts" memes. You know what I mean? And it was like this. It was like a warrior, like just like a warrior, like holding up an impaled Ben Shapiro on his spear, right? And it was like. I was like looking, I was like, that is romantic. That is like, if you went back, you took like a painter's, like, what was his name? Jones or whatever, the Welsh guy. Or if you got like, I don't know, like, I guess he could be, I would consider him romantic, like Francisco Goya. Like, if you got like some of these guys, these romantic guys, or even like Thomas Carlyle, and you showed them that meme, they would smile and they would get it, right?
They would get it for sure.
They would get it. They would think Ben Shapiro is a They would love to see him impaled on a spear. They would say this is a great meme. And they were, as Mike said, they're our guys. These are our guys, man. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we are over an hour, Mr. Mike. Do you have anything else you would like to bring up?
No, I'm good. I've just been riffing the whole time. So it's good to talk about this. This is an important movement. And it should be defended. Basically, these are the history of our people. This is the forerunners to our thing. There's a lot more to be said about it. We didn't get to talk about Giambattista Vico, who predates Romanticism, but is very much a kind of important theorist in his own right that's saying a lot of the same things.
You want to talk about him now, or do you want to save it for another time?
He could even deserve his own episode. He's just such a massive figure. I think I'll say this and just leave it as a kind of like tantalizing teaser for some other time, that Vico really deserves to be our Marx. what Marx is to the left, Vico should be to us. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But we can move on to that another time. But no, this has been a good talk. It's something I'm passionate about, and I think it's something a lot of other guys are passionate about, both both consciously and sort of just in their gut. So yeah, no, I think it was worth doing an episode on.
Hell yeah. All right, folks. Well, I guess we're gonna close it down for this evening. I mean, I love this topic. I love talking about Romanticism. I love the art that came out of that movement. I love the art and the ideologies and the philosophies that were inspired by it. And I think that guys need to go back and take another look. Don't listen to the modern retards when they're talking about, oh, it was about individualism, and then don't listen to the people that say that it was an expression of Enlightenment and liberalism, because it wasn't. It was something completely different, and it deserves to be looked at in a proper light. And just go back and take a look. I guarantee you're gonna love it. But I appreciate all you culture dads out there for tuning in. Make sure to go over to imperiumpress.org/podcast and go check out all of the great stuff that Mr. Mike has brewing up. You got Imperium Cast podcast, you got us culture dads, you got hardback books on the Gumroad. There's all kinds of good stuff over there. So go check it out and sign up and continue to support Imperium Press.
You're listening to an episode of the latest Culture Dads, Age of Sword and Cassette, where two fathers and community leaders discuss modern culture from a timeless perspective. Head on over to culturedads.com for podcasts every week.